Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, August 12th, 2019. Time for yet another show. And for this one, we have the morning tweet of Bill in Portland, Maine that clears things up for us. Daily Coast Radio is live now after spending 2 weeks gallivanting. Did you know you were gallivanting? Gallivanting across the country looking for car keys. Found them in Alaska at the base of Denali, under the spruce tree, by the way. Greg Dworkin returns to the airwaves to talk to me, Kagro X, David Waldman. Talk me off the ledge. I'd say let's get back out on the ledge by the end of the 2 hours here today. All right, well, we've got plenty to cover here. World more or less falling apart, which is pretty much as Greg left it. I don't think it was his fault that, we didn't all go to hell just because he went to Alaska, All right. Lots to round up today, as I had to flatly tell you in the morning post today. Here's the situation. Greg Dworkin is back. Jeffrey Epstein is not. That's how the weekend went for many of us. Conspiracy theories already abound as to whether or not Jeffrey Epstein is really dead, whether he faked his own death and escaped out some sort of El Chapo tunnel of some kind. No one has... I mean, this is where we are. We really don't know what the hell's going on. I mean, I think he's dead, and I think that's it. And but lots of conspiracy theories. People trading conspiracy theories about which major political party in the United States assassinated Jeffrey Epstein. This is where we are in this day and age. And it's a pretty good indication of how bad things really have gotten out there. Speaking of conspiracies or stories I'm not 100% sure of or whatever, I read in passing this morning that, and this is not a topic I usually like to discuss at all for various reasons. Never mind what all the reasons are. I think you know all the reasons. But I read in passing that Barron Trump, Donald Trump's youngest child, who I don't even remember how old Barron is. I'm going to guess he's like about 13 or something like that. I read in passing he's not living at the White House any longer. I guess he was, but that possibly neither he nor Melania Trump are actually living in the White House anymore. And there may or may not actually be a practical explanation for it. I guess Barron is going to school at a private school somewhere in, I think, suburban Maryland. And maybe they thought it was a better idea. The White House is a terrible place, honestly, to grow up as a kid, I would think. Be better if whichever of your parents was president was a normal person and a normal president and not a lightning rod for all sorts of world-destroying hatred and conspiracy theory there, too, or a puppet for Putin. It's a bad place to be. And, of course, you're under scrutiny, et cetera. And so I think the word I got was that, I don't know. What do I got here? I mean, I just saw tweets in passing. They're coming from journalists who I think, generally speaking, are relatively trustworthy people for the most part. And that puts me at odds with the President of the United States. So, therefore, I'm in crazy land. But anyway, he might just be living closer to school. Kind of a drag to commute, even if you're going by limo with Secret Service escort, et cetera. And that Melania may be therefore living with him, and maybe her parents as well, who are also for a while possibly living in the White House, whatever. It sounds like actually a more normal, maybe, situation. It's not normal for the president, but whatever. We're beyond that. But maybe a more normal situation for him and for the parents if they were all living in suburban Maryland and he's going to school there. And fine. It's just weird that we don't actually know, and it isn't actually reported very much, and it's just kind of odd. And of course, who knows? And we don't want to really involve Barron in anything. It's very weird, and mostly weird just that you can tell a story like that, and you can't be 100% sure whether that's really true or not in the most watched house in the world, and that's a weird feeling. It's fine if that's where he is. It's fine if that's the explanation. It's fine if that's not the explanation. It's just weird that I couldn't find a story that said, yeah, this is what's actually happening, and be able to leave it at that. That's kind of where we are, indicative of everything else, which is actually much more important. All these other things, far more important. Certainly, the most important things don't even appear to be happening in this country, though I guess they're coming shortly. Hong Kong aflame in protest, Moscow aflame in protest as well. Both protests facing brutal repression and crackdown. And in the meantime, Putin, I guess, interested in seeing if he can't spark the same sort of unrest here in the United States so that we take our eye off the ball on what's going on there. Not that we were in any position to intervene. It's very rare that it's the case that we're in a position to intervene in Moscow, no matter who is the president. But another presidency would have seen a lot more focus on the push for freedom and democracy and support from that push for that protest coming from the United States. The president of the United States at present has had nothing but support to offer for the repression and crackdown, which is a little bit of an unusual situation. And I guess that's it. We're just talking about the unusual situations we happen to find ourselves in with an incompetent moron of a president who's the puppet of dictators the world over. It's a tough thing to get used to. But occasionally you get to go on vacation from it, right? Okay. Good morning, Greg. Welcome back. How are you?
Good morning. I'm just fine. How are you?
It's great. Everything is upside down, but fantastic. It's
yeah.
It's a weird world. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be able to do a podcast each day.
Well, some things stay the same, some things change. Alaska is hot in the summer.
Aha.
The week before I got there, it hit 92 in Anchorage, which is unheard of for Alaska. But then again, in winter, it's cold. And in Denali, where I was, it can hit minus 60 on a good February day. And yet, although that's kind of a constant, and the summer season is about 4 months where everybody tries to make a living before they hunker in for the 8 months of winter, including the bears, the signs of global warming that you can see there are absolutely unmistakable. The receding of the glaciers, the hot temperatures that people aren't used to, and then the subtle things, not just the glacier melts, but the birds laying eggs a little bit earlier than normal, or berries coming early because spring comes early, but out of sync with the animals. So if you then get a frost, you kill the bird eggs and kill off a generation of birds, or the berries don't match the animals, and so it's a little bit harder to propagate the life forms and such. And those kind of subtle things, have a profound impact. You also get a sense of the vast and beautiful nature of the Alaskan wilderness and the subarctic tundra. It's just absolutely fascinating. But you also realize there's no people there. Oh. I mean, there's hardly any roads except between Fairbanks and Anchorage. Mm-hmm. And then everything else is you better fly there because otherwise you're not getting there.
Oh, okay. Did you do any flying while you were there?
I flew in, but we stayed in that one area because it was really hard to get around otherwise. And, of course, the other thing is there are indigenous people that have been there for 10,000 years. So when you say wilderness, you sort of, erase them. They've been there forever, and they're still there and doing subsistence living and allowed to do that. And, it's fascinating seeing it through their eyes in terms of what's happening to the land, which, of course, they're not happy about. I mean, if you grew up harvesting your food in a certain way, then, for example, the idea that Pebble Mine will be approved by the Trump EPA to open and then dump toxic waste into the largest salmon fishery in the world, just hits doubly hard. So fascinating trip, and I just thought I'd get that out of the way.
Okay.
But we are back, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Alaska first is that even in the remote wilderness, we heard about the shootings. We were in Seward, which is a relatively small fishing village with very large cruise ships that come there. I didn't go by cruise ships, but you can't miss them in the harbor because they tower over everything.
Yeah.
They describe themselves as a small drinking village with a fishing problem. And even there, you talked about Trump. We drove through Wasilla, where Sarah Palin is still a laughingstock. But the shootings had a profound impact. And this is Alaska, libertarian red Alaska. And nonetheless, people thought this was too much and stuff needed to be done. So that gives you a sort of a gauge of how hard those shootings hit this country.
Yes. Well, we're still having that problem, and they're coming at a pace we can't keep up with. But at least we're getting rid of
not
the
only
too
not
soon
keep up
thing.
with, but I was looking through. I didn't collect them because there were too many. But I don't know if you noticed, but there were 2, 3, maybe 4 attempted nipped in the bud terrorist sort of situations.
Yes, including
some of them mild, like
week.
a guy decided to just dress himself in body armor and take a rifle and walk through Walmart filming himself just
Happens
to see
all the
people's
time.
reactions.
Yep.
To actual arrests of people planning stuff like taking out a synagogue or an LGBTQ bar or something like that. And then at least 2 or 3 others I haven't even mentioned. So, the idea that this is gamer culture. I mean, one guy does something and the next guy tries to see if he can rack up the score a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess so, although, well, humans in competition.
Right. You're used to that, but you're used to that like every 6 months. Now it's coming like every 4 days.
Yes. Well, now you can beam it around the world, and of course, if you can buy the equipment off the shelf, that helps move the assembly line along a little faster, too.
Right. So I found this fascinating piece by a Twitter friend of mine, Alan Levinovitz, who is a religion professor, I believe. Know him on Twitter anyway. And he wrote this piece for the Huffington Post, which I think is just fascinating. So I want to start with that.
All right. Let's see.
Then we'll get to some politics. It's called Gun Culture and Wellness Culture Come from the Same Place.
Oh.
And if you want to bring politics into it, just think of Marianne Williamson.
That culture comes from there, too. Okay.
Well,
Gun
here's his
culture and
subheader.
wellness culture.
Fear,
Yes.
suspicion of established authority, a feeling of intense disempowerment. People turn to guns for the comforts that others get from oils and energy crystals.
Huh. Okay.
Right? An angle maybe you hadn't thought of before. That's my job, to bring stuff to the show that you hadn't thought of before. Gun culture and wellness culture may seem like they have as much in common as an AR-15 and essential oil, but don't let superficial differences between Gwyneth Paltrow and Wayne LaPierre fool you.
Are there?
They do seem different. But then again, they both seem nuts, so maybe that's the common thread here. Members of their respective communities are actually seeking the same kind of existential comfort, safety, and security in a fallen, dangerous world, where the only person you can really count on is yourself. And Bill in Portland, Maine. Whether it's wielding a weapon to protect your family against home invaders or taking natural supplements to protect your body against invasive toxins, the allure of the fantasy is identical, and it explains the profound appeal of both when empirical evidence doesn't. And by the way, it makes a good argument right up front that, the facts aren't going to do it any more than the facts do it in politics. It's all about how you feel about it.
All right.
It's not what you know, it's how you feel.
I can buy it.
Alan Levinovitz, say that fast. 3 times fast. Well, maybe he'll appear like Beetlejuice. I've spent the last 4 years studying how people end up believing in a range of medical pseudoscience, including reversing cancer with a raw vegan diet, avoiding vaccines in favor of homeopathic medicine. They're united by a set of shared concerns, all built around grains of truth, frustration with arrogant and uncaring doctors, raise hand, suspicion of corrupt government scientists, and a heightened sense of environmental risks. I mean, doctors can absolutely be arrogant and uncaring. I can't tell you how many times I tell my patients, you really have to take these medicines if you want to breathe better.
Yes.
And the medical term for having to take the medicine is, this is some stuff you have to do. It works most of the time, and some people just get really offended by it. But I'm a plain-spoken doctor. Their discontents metastasize rapidly. Get that? Metastasize, doctor, medicine,
Okay.
eventually causing severe emotional pain that demands to be addressed. The process is often catalyzed by tragedy, devastating medical diagnosis in oneself or a loved one. This is serious stuff, even though I tease a little bit about it. And it's really a good insight. And the realization that standard approaches can't guarantee a solution. As a consequence, the afflicted immerse themselves in personal narratives of redemption outside mainstream medicine, which compared with reassuringly detailed instructions on how to defend yourself against suffering when the authorities can't or won't help. The result is what I call, Alan Levinovitz, empowering epistemology, a way to make sense of the world based not on the best possible evidence, but rather on the evidence that gives you the strongest feeling of control. The communities that embrace it share some structural features with archaic aspects of traditional religion. Like-minded people gather and testify to the power of the ritual and talisman, be they empowering coconut oil or energy crystals. The power is all the more real for being denied by conventional wisdom.
Yeah. Was there a
Chronic
problem
Lyme
with coconut
disease,
oil?
vaccines cause autism, that kind of stuff. So you have to go see Lyme literate doctors, and you have to all gather together.
Yes.
Right? Alan, associate this way of thinking with medical pseudoscience, so I was shocked to see textbook signs of it in the least likely place, a recent essay on gun culture for The Atlantic by the conservative writer David French.
Aha.
And then, less than a week later, I saw those same signs in a New York Times op-ed, I Wanted to Be a Good Mom, So I Got a Gun, by Bethany Mandel. A visit to the magazine section of my local Barnes & Noble confirmed it. Gun culture and wellness culture are both built on empowering belief systems. French and Mandel opened their explanations of gun culture with stories of personal trauma. In his essay, French tells readers his wife was a victim of sexual abuse and that his family has received multiple threats. In her op-ed, Mandel recalls a spate of burglaries in her neighborhood just after her father left her home when she was only 3 years old. Were they writing about wellness culture, the stories might have described the sudden onset of chronic pain or an autism diagnosis, and I would throw in, or chronic Lyme disease. French generalizes the power of these experiences perfectly. It starts with the consciousness of a threat, perhaps not the kind of threat my family's experienced. Some people experience more, some less, and some people don't experience a threat at all, but they're aware of those they do. With consciousness of a threat comes the awareness of vulnerability. It's how Dante's archetypal tale of redemption begins. In the middle of our life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood.
Okay.
So it goes on to say the empowerment comes from a place of intense disempowerment, and the rhetoric of gun culture, like that of wellness culture, reinforces it with endless terrifying anecdotes.
Yeah.
We all know somebody whose home has been violated. We see stories on the news. Once you've heard enough of these stories, they're evil men. This is all from David French. Whereas wellness magazines emphasize an environment polluted by toxins, gun culture emphasizes souls polluted by evil. In both cases, the magnitude of real dangers is exaggerated far beyond the evidence by showcasing anecdotes instead of data. And that's the typical, well, if I had a gun, I felt better, or I read in a paper where one person actually stopped somebody else, and they, ignore the facts, which is that if you have a gun in the house, you're more likely to hurt yourself or have somebody commit suicide than you are to stop an intruder that hardly ever happens. But, that's the point. It's all about feel-good, anecdotes and stuff like that. And he's talking about the fact that if you reject data and if you reject statistics, because you, in fact, start from a place of being suspicious about established authority, then it leads you to a place where you start looking, I did the research. I look for my own data. I look for my own place of finding the truth. And then you find other people who agree with you, and then you just go down that road. And Alan Levinovitz adds, the importance of this narrative cannot be overstated. It's completely transformative. French describes it in language reminiscent of religious conversion. Your life has changed for the better. Your community is expanded to include people you truly like, who have perhaps helped you through a tough time, and you treasure these relationships. You feel a sense of burning conviction that you, your family, and your community are safer and freer because you own and carry a gun. And he adds, just before that, you don't need doctors or the police. You have your empowering narrative and the props to act it out. And then, so the insight is, it's easy to see why gun owners are so angered and threatened by the rhetoric of gun control advocates. Owning a gun for self-defense springs from a deep-seated desire to protect yourself and your family, no different from the motivation of parents who reject vaccines or try unproven experimental stem cell therapy. But detractors call you a murderer, a terrorist, an idiot, someone who wants children to die, and they label you the villain, threaten to force you into vaccination or giving up your guns. But those aspects of your life are the keystone of your architecture of security, your personal identity. They define you not as a villain, but as a hero. Support for gun rights is motivated precisely by our devotion to protecting our kids, says Mandel. And why can't others see that?
Yeah. Well,
right?
I understand what they're saying.
Right. And so it's just, if you understand what they're saying, it changes the way you talk to them.
Well, I haven't had a chance yet.
Like normally when you have a political discussion, I know it happens on Twitter. I know it happens in our circles. But if you really want to have a persuasive dialogue with somebody, you don't start by saying, look, I know you're an idiot and stupid, but let me explain to you why you're wrong. Unless you're Armando. He does that to me all the time.
Yes.
It's not always persuasive even when he's right. And he's right often. But if you want to persuade somebody, not the right approach.
Okay.
Yes. And so wellness culture and gun culture exploit truths for their persuasiveness. Guns really do save some people's lives, and certain aspects of wellness culture are legitimate ways to improve health. Now, if you're living in Alaska and you have a remote cabin in the woods, and there are bears, and there really are, I saw them.
Yes.
You might want to have a gun.
You might.
If you live off of shooting moose and eating it, you're not allowed to sell it. But if that's how you live, you might want a gun.
Yes.
You can understand certain circumstances and certain environments where you might want to have a firearm. And if you talk about all gun owners as being crazy, it's a difficult dialogue to have. So I'm just pointing out, that for those of us who are foreign to it, but well familiar with crystals heal you, and depression is just a matter of cheering up, and if you believe in love, everything gets fixed, and we understand and appreciate that culture and have to deal with it because it's so familiar, then perhaps relating it to gun culture for those of us who are foreign to it may help us see it as something similar that we can relate to, at least understanding it, not adopting it.
I think it's a good tool.
That helps to understand the reactions that one would get politically and otherwise, and I think that's in general a good thing. I always like to understand people, even if I don't agree with them.
Right. So the article's a good tool. It's just a tool. There's nothing more to it. It's an inanimate object. Right? Don't worry about it. Right. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
You called it an article when it was really a post, so therefore you're disqualified for discussing.
That's true. I'm sorry. That's the end of that discussion for me. I'll just sit quietly here.
So he adds, the best approach is the one that pediatricians and other experts have laid out for dealing with vaccine hesitancy. First, don't vilify. Like parents who are hesitant to vaccinate, gun owners are genuinely trying to be good parents and good citizens. Dismissing them as irrational and dangerous will only serve to alienate them. Second, lead by listening. Attentiveness to parents' concerns is important, notes the American Academy of Pediatrics in its clinical report on countering vaccine hesitancy. This is the best way to earn trust and respect, especially when engaging with somebody who feels threatened and disempowered. Lastly, make sure to acknowledge gun owners as a diverse community of individuals, each with their own story and reasons for behaving the way they do. Talking about gun nuts like talking about anti-vaxxers is counterproductive. It reinforces us versus them, makes it difficult to reach persuadable members, further cementing their loyalty to a community that provides affirmation instead of condemnation. You can still get incensed at Dana Loesch, but however she mounts her name, whether she's selling AR-15s or about super beats, he says. But
right, true.
I also understand that these people are trapped by their need for an empowering epistemology. They're scared too. So that's always worth remembering.
Yes, although Twitter makes it difficult sometimes to get the point across without referring offhand to...
but sometimes you talk about people in real life.
Yeah, well, when you're talking to someone face-to-face in particular or having a discussion about something in particular, then yeah, you can certainly back off from that. That's not to say you have to have the same discussion with everybody. Just as you would treat all gun owners and vaccine-concerned parents as individuals, if you were discussing things with them, you should each of your conversations can be individually tailored as well.
Right, or even if you just start out by acknowledging that I understand that people can feel threatened.
Yes.
I mean, that alone is
But you're so
a
crazy.
helpful, stick your foot in the door if you want to talk about this stuff. If you don't want to talk about this stuff at all, that's fine.
Then you can just
run.
say, you're nuts, get out of here. You can always go with that. And some days this,
I mean,
and some days
nobody's
the other.
required to be an ambassador or be nice to people.
That is true, too.
And here's a funny anecdote. I was talking about this wonderful, wonderful little GIF, however you want to pronounce it,
there's no
of Elizabeth Warren
Yes.
running into Kamala Harris at the Iowa State Fair, which we'll talk about after the break, the Iowa State Fair.
Oh, all right.
And they just embrace each other.
What?
How are you? Are you good? I mean, it was a wonderful thing. I actually have it up in the Pundit Roundup this morning, but it's a nice little clip. And I tweeted it with the heading, Dems in disarray, with the little trademark, because media's always reporting us as, if we see each other, we're at our throats, which of course isn't true. And somebody took me to task for headlining such a GIF with hate. Why did you have to label it as such a hateful thing? And I said, I'm New York, this is sardonic humor. And then they started to lecture me about how, hate is bad and love is good.
I see.
And, it didn't go well.
But, okay. Well, these things happen.
And I thought of this, and I said, do I put you in the crystals category here? Is that the way I'm supposed to love isn't the answer to everything. Sometimes sarcasm is.
Okay.
But then again, I'm from New York.
Yes. And they should recognize that and understand that.
Well,
not isolate you.
New Yorkers are going to get outvoted by the rest of the country because we're not nice, but that's okay. I mean, it's just a different way of dealing with it.
All right. Well, there's a lot of.
But if you want an example of how love can be annoying, well, that's it, right?
Yes. Okay. Right. All right. Well, that's a new bumper sticker. Love can be annoying. You can probably.
Love can be annoying.
It's true. All right. Well, we'll be back with a roundup of the other strange tales from around the world, and there are plenty of them, not just
including the butter cow and counting kernels.
All right. That's up next. The big time Iowa Fair stories after the break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us. I have just been online on Amazon. I've ordered a crystal AR-15 with essential oils to make the moving parts work. So I think I'm in tune with where we are for the first part of the show. But moving on to the Iowa State Fair and other crazy things that you've gotten.
I suppose you're supposed to oil your gun so that it doesn't jam, but I didn't know it had to be with essential oils.
Well, they're essential. Otherwise, your gun won't work. So that makes it essential.
Right, I suppose. So we know that the El Paso killer was echoing the incendiary words of conservative media stars, because the New York Times tells us that.
Yes. And
with the subheading, The New Nativists. But basically, they're highlighting the word invasion and how often Fox News people have used it compared to how often Trump has used it.
All the time.
And there's a pretty big backlash going on against Trump and how things went. His visit to El Paso and Dayton went very poorly. The Dayton people afterwards said that it was pretty clear he had absolutely no empathy. We can perhaps, skip over the controversy about the family reaction to Trump's picking up the baby and holding his thumbs up picture there.
Yes.
Because families are entitled to their own view, and they happen to be Trump supporters, and that's fine. And they were pleased that Trump came down and spoke to them, and that's fine. They were not pleased about the vilification they got afterwards, I get that. I mean, there were Newtown families that support the NRA, and, it's their right to do that. You have to step back and give them that space. They're not politicians. They didn't sign up for this. And believe me, they didn't ask to be in that position in the first place. But the reaction to Trump's lack of empathy has been pretty profound. Even the White House thought it was a disaster of a trip to those two cities. What's that?
And he lives there, so, he's going to have to get them in shape.
And Trump was very angry about it and was yelling at people because he didn't have people to defend him. He made the decision not to have cameras, and then he was mad because there were no cameras showing how everybody loved him.
Yeah, I wonder about how the decision... I mean, ultimately, I guess he's responsible for it, but he may not feel like he was given enough options, or that somebody recommended, we'll do our own cameras. Oh, okay.
May I simply suggest the easiest interpretation of this?
Sure.
If it didn't work out well and turned out to be a disaster, it was probably Jared's idea. Trump did it, and then he's mad.
Yeah, that could
That's be. 99 times out of 100 what happened.
Yeah. I do wonder sometimes maybe he makes the decision and then it doesn't work out, and then he says, Jared told me to do it. I don't know.
Well, Jared was probably telling him to do it because Jared's really dumb.
Well, yeah, he is. Well,
but he's protected. Okay. So.
Yeah, can't get rid of the guy.
Yeah, he's married to the princess, so, that's the way that goes.
Oh, well.
And the big issue there politically, of course, is simply this. Mark Murray, and I gave you this picture, which nobody on the radio can see, of Mark Murray saying, losing the suburbs. In the 6 national NBC Wall Street Journal polls conducted this year, Trump's job rating has been underwater among suburban residents, with just one exception. That is to say, most of the time, 5 out of 6 times, the suburban opinion of Trump's net approval rating was negative.
Mm-hmm, okay.
And Murray adds, given Trump's vulnerability in the suburbs, and that's where this screwing up on gun issues really comes out, his lack of empathy comes out, at least with women. Men seem to be impervious to stupidity. But if you're looking at the women vote, and women do vote more than men, for Republican men it doesn't matter, but for Republican women it does. Given Trump's vulnerability in the suburbs, here's maybe the central question for Democratic primary voters. Which of their 20-some candidates is best able to win the Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta suburbs? That's a great question.
Okay.
Because if you win those suburbs, you win those states. We're talking about Arizona, Texas, and Georgia, which are not deep ruby red and absolutely impervious to Democratic advances. So it's not an unreasonable question to ask if you're a Democratic strategist. Now, you may not like the whole electability question, but if you want to win elections, you got to appeal to voters. It's just like one of those basic things.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Well, all right. I'm looking for ways to get the voters out of the picture.
So David Frum,
yeah,
who writes about all sorts of things and isn't people's favorite pundit, but he's got a good one here in The Atlantic. The shame and disgrace will linger. On Saturday, President Trump spread a conspiracy theory accusing the Clintons of murdering Jeffrey Epstein.
He did.
I suppose we should talk about Jeffrey Epstein. He's dead.
Yep, okay.
Right? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but people are mad because he died taking his secrets with him, but he didn't really. Right. Because his assistant, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Ghislaine Maxwell, is still alive. His 2,000 papers are still in the possession of the feds. A safe full of pictures is still in the possession of the feds, so this isn't over. And, of course, his victims are still around.
Right. True. Somebody pointed out that maybe all his non-disclosure agreements might be up in the air.
Null and void?
Maybe, although, rich people tend to leave behind estates, as they say, and those things tend to linger on for a while and enforce things even though the person themselves is dead. So I don't know how well that works. Yeah,
but here is where the average American gets to play lawyer because they saw it on TV.
Awesome.
Epstein's dead, so he has no standing to object.
True, unless they stand him up and say he's not dead. I don't know. Tie them to like Weekend at Bernie's.
So Jeffrey Epstein kills himself.
Yeah, maybe.
Of course, it highlights the fact that prison is not a safe place. It's probably underfunded, and lots of prison reform needs to be done. But skipping over that for the moment, Jeffrey Epstein's dead. And there are dueling conspiracy theories about which ex-president or president killed him.
Yes.
Which is pretty much summing up politics
really
in America today.
Right. And this is a shame and a disgrace.
Well, the fact that Trump retweeted a Bill Clinton did it conspiracy, of course, is completely in character for the guy who said that Obama wasn't born in the United States.
Right.
But it is a shame and a disgrace. And I guess my point about that is simply that's how you lose Republican women in the suburbs. And so he had the lack of empathy marathon with the two shootings. And then he does this. And Republican strategists are really sweating because they think that this is real trouble for the Republican Party in 2020, regardless of what you read about how confident they are. They're not. They're kind of really sweating this.
Yeah.
They are losing the suburbs. That's why his poll numbers are so low.
It's been a big story in the last couple of weeks. A lot of suburb stories, a lot of suburb takes.
From places like Georgia, from places like, is Texas in play and so on and so forth. That stuff's real.
Yeah.
So, he's got to deal with that. And, of course, we have to deal with that.
Right. And a good observation that I finally included at the end of last week where one of the pundits had pointed out that the nature of the Democratic caucus in the House that Nancy Pelosi is dealing with and how she deals with these things and all the various issues she's juggling there, even during the recess, that the 2006 electoral victory had left her with a caucus that was still very heavily rural Democrats, whereas now there were only about a third of the caucus, and there were at least as many suburban Democrats in her caucus as there were rural, and that doesn't even get to the fact that the other third are urban and not on the not walking that tightrope. So she's got a very different caucus to deal with, and that comes out differently in the way they handle. Or could come out differently anyway in the way they handle things like impeachment, but certainly on the issue of guns was very different.
Right.
It doesn't change how Republicans are.
I've got this lovely AP article featuring your favorite congressperson.
Oh, all right.
Centuries not squad. Moderate Dems wants to watch for 2020. Abigail Spanberger talked about rural broadband. She held court on health care, solar energy, and border crisis. But as the freshman Democrat from Virginia fielded a dozen questions during a recent town hall, she never once took on President Trump directly. We're making every decision, whichever way it goes, based on facts and evidence and our duty to uphold the Constitution. And this is a story about a different kind of squad, and they're talking about Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, Chrissy Houlihan in Pennsylvania, and Spanberger and Elaine Luria. And how talented and steeped in national security they are, and how they all are in Trump districts and how they have to be careful. And buried in the article is an interesting little snippet here where Nancy Pelosi advises them, your best bet is just don't talk about Trump at all.
Yeah, maybe
just talk about what you want to do. And for them, it's probably true.
That's right. Well, she's an icon, Abigail Spanberger. That's what I call the middle dividing yellow line down the middle of the road these days. So Don't cross the Abigail Spanberger.
Right. In the meantime, Donald Trump is retweeting Katie Hopkins, which the Brits are happy to call a racist, but our media says Katie Hopkins, somebody who's been accused of racism.
Oh, well,
because we don't seem to be able to say the word. Of course, Trump is somebody who's been accused of racism by Democrats rather than a racist. But he is a racist, and apparently he gets really upset when you call him a racist. So calling him a racist, because if you keep repeating racist over and over, it's a branding thing, and he understands branding, kind of upsets him because the racist in the White House really hates being called a racist.
That is racist of him to hate that.
Well, So he's really upset about it, and he should be. He's upset that he didn't get good ratings for his empathy trip. He's upset that people call him a racist. He's actually so upset that rumor has it that he's considering doing something on guns. Wow. And as many commentators have pointed out, nothing's going to get done as usual unless he does something, not because he's so smart, not because he's so powerful, but because the issues become so partisan.
Aha. Well, wait till
Republicans
he moves
oppose, Democrats defend. If Trump, with his support of the base, which remember is really interesting, the base never changes. Trump will never lose the base. We all know that, right?
That is what
You've heard
they
it
say.
said a billion times.
Yes.
But,
That's
of course,
a lie,
he's
but-
afraid of giving up on guns and making any kind of concession because he'll lose his supporters. Remember the ones that we just said that were absolutely immutable and couldn't be changed?
Yeah. Could they be changed?
Well, if the other counter story is that if Trump gives in at all, Wayne LaPierre warned him he'll lose his base, the one that can't be moved.
Okay. But
And so you're
said-
supposed to put that together and make sense of it and think it's logical.
Yes. Well, the answer is the problem is that he will. He hates being called a racist, so he'll move on guns, but he'll ban what they call the black guns, and everyone will say, "See," and then I don't know.
Well,
how
he'll
that
tie
will
it to
work
immigration.
out.
He's already tried that, which has been rejected.
Yeah?
I'll ban
Oh.
guns if you ban immigration. It's
Oh.
a tit for tat, and both sides and everybody's happy.
Wow. Well, yeah, that didn't survive for very long.
No, about 12 minutes.
I wonder if he's trying to
But,
bring
you
that
know,
back.
it'll be interesting because I'm perfectly happy. You know, I think it's a win-win. I think that if he moves on guns and loses part of his base because of it, great.
That's good. Yes. I mean, yeah, I'll take that part.
Yeah, I'll take that part. I mean, you know, as many of his advisors will tell him, it won't do you any good politically because, like, nobody who hates you is all going to suddenly like you. They'll congratulate you for doing this and still hate you and vote against you. I'm okay
Yes.
with that, too.
Sure. You know, I'll take that. That's another good deal, I guess. As long as it doesn't come with the deal of also no one should strike the bargain where we collapse on immigration in trade for the guns.
Yeah, that one's
If he
already
wants to
dead.
go ahead
So.
and do that, then fine.
That's
Okay.
as dead as Jeffrey Epstein.
See, chin stroker there. Okay. Well,
Is he really dead, or
we
is
don't
he really
know for
alive?
sure. Right.
Somebody
I see.
suggested what he really did is he crafted a body out of butter and
The Iowa
snuck
State
out
Fair.
while everybody was distracted, just like in the movies, which of course led to the suggestion that the butter cow did it at the
Oh.
Iowa State Fair with a butter knife, you know. But we don't know. I mean, how could you really know?
No one can know for sure.
No one can know for sure. Well, in any case, so this Iowa State Fair is happening, and all the Democrats
Yes,
are there.
right.
And Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are chums, and everybody's doing well. And every day they have this, you may remember, every 4 years, they have the kernel count. About 4,000 people a day come to the Iowa State Fair, and each individual is allowed to take a corn kernel and drop it in the alphabetical order, 20 jars. And then at the end of the day, they count the kernel. They call it cast your kernel.
Okay.
And then they add up who's ahead. And as if it's a running total, and I guess it'll go through the whole 2 weeks of the state fair, and we've only been a couple of days into it. But so far, the Democrats, Biden is at 24, Warren at 16, Buttigieg at 16, Harris at 11, Sanders at 9. They've all been well received there. The Republicans, 97% Trump. Weld gets 3. And that's out of 20,972 kernels cast as of 5 p.m. Sunday.
So how many people?
But perhaps the most interesting, 20,972 kernels cast. What perhaps is the most interesting is of the total, 52% cast for the Democrats and 48% cast for the Republicans. And as Iowa's starting line points out, it's just hardly never that the Democrats are actually ahead in the kernel count.
Oh, interesting. Well,
That is interesting.
What percentage of people who attend the fair bother to cast a kernel? I guess is one question.
I don't know.
But no one knows. And also, does Iowa have more days of kernel casting than actual voting?
Probably.
That is, yeah. So there's a
I mean, you
lesson
got 2
for
weeks
the-
to do it, so that's pretty cool.
I find that pretty interesting. So I don't know what kind of turnout they're getting and everything, but it would just
Luckily,
be ironic.
this is a straight election rather than a kernel caucus, which would be really difficult to pull off.
Right, I know, that's the thing. I wasted my whole fair just standing here waiting to
In the
cast my
corner,
kernel.
and-
This is going
like
on
I was
forever.
the one person, you know,
This
and nobody
is
came over
crazy.
and talked to me, so I didn't know.
I didn't say this. I missed out on the pork chop on a stick. I didn't get any deep fried
Yeah.
anything. I had to wait
that's
here
not
the
true.
whole
I
time.
had fried onions and garlic on a stick, and like nobody wants to stand next to me. I don't get it.
Ah, okay. That made you unviable. That's the problem.
Yeah, I suppose. So, everybody's doing well. And again, it's a reminder.
nice.
Joe Biden makes his usual gaffes. I'm not a Biden supporter, but I do have to point this out. Not only is he leading in the polls, and I'll get to the fact that I don't think he'll do well in 6 months as he's doing now, but right now he's ahead in the polls.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing well enough. He makes good enough speeches where he chooses to attack Trump. I think the two leading candidates right now are Elizabeth Warren, who's doing very well in Iowa. Buttigieg is the dark horse. Remember, Biden 24, Warren 16, Buttigieg 16.
Mm-hmm.
And it may well be that for the moment, Biden is doing fine. And since he's the front runner, you want to beat him, he's got to, have some of his supporters desert him. I guess the point I'm making is that as a non-Biden supporter, if you see everything he does as a gaffe and proof that he shouldn't be the nominee, that actually doesn't hold very much weight. It's when his own supporters start seeing it that his numbers will fall. And he is vulnerable enough and, frankly, a poor enough campaigner that may well happen, and Iowa may be the place that it happens. If you're looking on the betting markets like predicted, Elizabeth Warren has passed Biden as most likely to be nominated by the Democratic Party, which is kind of interesting. It's hardly predictive. They're not that good, but they are picking up something that I think is real, and that is that Biden's inevitability is kind of oozing away every day. Nonetheless, while he's still the front runner, he gets the most coverage, and if he wants to spend his time talking about Trump, that's great. Warren, on the other hand, tends to take Nancy Pelosi's advice, doesn't talk about Trump much at all, and talks about her policies.
Yes, well, that's
in
a very
fact,
big thing
that's
for
the
her.
whole thing, right? The bumper sticker, I've got a plan for that.
Right.
So one of the people I know on Twitter who has contributed to her campaign says that when you do that, they send you an email with a thank you GIF, with the heading, "We've got a GIF for that." And so, the idea that she actually has plans and it is a positive, uplifting, optimistic candidate, that's Warren. That's a label that she's going to wind up embracing. And I think it's part of the reason why she's doing as well as she is, which doesn't mean that she will be the nominee. It doesn't mean that Harris won't overtake them, because Harris is the one that people think have the political instincts to take on somebody like Trump. Biden has the demographic characteristics of somebody who can take on Trump.
Plus pocket
And
squares.
I just think it's interesting that Biden is running against Trump, whereas the others, Warren is running on her policies and Harris is doing kind of a mix. And we'll see how that all works out and what people really want.
Delaney. Probably.
Delaney had a great picture. I don't know if you saw that picture of him going down the slide.
Yes, I thought I had seen that before.
You get to sit on a burlap sack and you go down a plastic slide. It's really kind of fun. Everybody's having fun.
Like.
Delaney's just staring straight ahead as if he's a hostage. And it is just so funny watching him go down the slide.
Had previously been over his head, and he did not know where he was. And then they said, take that off, sit on it, and see what happens. All right. Unimpressed.
Either that,
he was.
Either that, or he's incredibly scared and he's just trying to get through it.
That could be. I mean, maybe he just doesn't like heights, or you get that you hit that dip where your stomach, the pit of your stomach falls to, or
well, he didn't react at all.
Throat.
So I could just watch that thing over and over and over. It's a short video, or it's just a still picture, but it's really pretty funny.
It's pretty good. Well, he's on an even keel, and that's good for a president.
Right. I think everybody agrees, just about everybody, including Delaney, that the field needs to get smaller. Of course, people disagree about who's the one that should drop out, but 20 is just too many.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Anybody who didn't get any corn, if you didn't get corn at the Iowa State Fair, you're finished. That's all there is.
If you want to be inclusive, this is where I left off when I left, but it's still a race between Biden, Warren, Harris, and then the tier after that is Buttigieg and Sanders. I don't think Sanders is really keeping up with the top tier.
No.
His fans will argue with that, but I don't think so. And then if you want to be savvy about it, as many people are starting to write, which does make it true, it looks like a two-person race between Biden and Warren right now. Right now. We got a long way to go, and things are going to change.
Okay.
But Warren has been creeping up in the polls in a very, steady manner. She's the tortoise, and Biden's the hare. And right now, especially as she draws big crowds and does very well in Iowa, and her poll numbers look good in Iowa, even her kernel counts look good in Iowa, she's the talk of Iowa right now.
Okay. Well, that's what Iowa's job is right now, to talk about this stuff.
But is she electable? I don't know what that means.
I don't know. Is that another candidate? But is she? Buttigieg,
Mr. Electable. Ms.
But is she electable? Right, yeah.
Is running against Trump. But is she is the nickname that they've given them.
Right. Close colleague of Butter Emails. And the Butter Cow and the Butter Emails.
Yeah, Butter Cow. Butter.
That's what they should have done. Oh. I was too late for the Iowa State Fair, though. But I would make like an envelope icon out of butter, and what the hell is that? It's Butter Emails.
Butter Emails. Yeah, it should be great. Giant sculpture, right?
That'll be. I assume that has an expiration date, though. Okay, like butter.
Yeah. Like butter.
Like
I think I'll write the Butter Cow's on Twitter, so I think I'll write the Butter Cow and ask what they think of that. Because you usually get an answer.
Yeah, well, you send it in an email, and
people having fun.
That's the answer, right? So when he answers you, you say, "I got a butter email."
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what else is on the agenda for today? It's late already. Look.
Well, I'm just trying to chat with my friend David, who I haven't seen in a couple of weeks, and just bring us back here. So what else do we have? I have to give you this headline. It's in the Pundit Roundup.
Oh, okay.
For today, which I think I dropped off. But Julie K. Brown, journalist extraordinaire from the Miami Herald, posted the headline and a picture of the headline from the Miami Herald. Big front page, giant font. The easy way out. One day after more than 2,000 unsealed documents gave brutal details of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation, the multimillionaire committed suicide in his jail cell. Now, there's two parts of that I want to go over. It is perfectly appropriate to refer to Jeffrey Epstein as the child sex trafficker, not the financier.
Yeah, he wasn't maybe not even
Okay, don't
financier
dignify him
also.
with that. And the other part of it, as you point out, is what do you mean financier? Where did his money come from?
Right.
Was it all blackmail? Was it more than just Leslie Wexner, the head of the Victoria's Secret holding company, who in fact is now objecting to the fact that Epstein stole all his money? Now, after he's dead.
Now I'm mad. Right before he died, he was mad too.
Yeah, but only like this week.
When he was in jail, he was mad.
Not 2 years ago, not 10 years
right.
ago.
Power of attorney
only now
and
that
everything.
I discovered my finances, sorted itself out, and I finally discovered he was stealing money from me all these years.
Yeah, I kept giving him houses and islands.
That's why when the rest of the documents come out, it's going to be awfully interesting. Awfully interesting.
Yeah, I thought it made a big splash as a story over the weekend, considering that it appeared at first going into the weekend that this was not going to be a story because the unsealed documents to that point were that there was no evidence that Trump or Clinton, for that matter, had actually been in any inappropriate contact with any of these girls that Epstein had kidnapped. And
that's why each of them killed him.
Yeah, right.
It was like Murder on the Orient Express. They held the knife together.
Yes.
Clasping hands in one hand and the other hand each holding the knife, and they both did it.
Right, because let's both do this together because we have no reason.
Because neither one was implicated. Right. There, everyone rings about you logically.
I wanted them so I'm killing him because I wanted his victims to implicate you, and they didn't. And you are mad because they didn't implicate me. That's it for this guy.
Meanwhile, the New York Post reports during his Hampton fundraiser last night, Trump claimed that was Friday. Trump claimed he wasn't a racist, then proceeded to mock U.S. allies South Korea and Japan by mimicking Japanese and Korean accents. Oh. Trump put on a fake Japanese accent to recount his conversation with Shinzo Abe.
Aha. I was
but he's not a racist.
Different. No, not at all.
Racist
He's
Trump
just from a
hates to be
different
called
time.
racist. So when you tell racist stories about racist Trump, he gets all racist-y mad, you know.
Back in his day, Bugs Bunny could get away with that, so he can too. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that was interesting, and I saw a lot of people saying
I think his
that wasn't
excuse
even
was
a
Archie
story.
Bunker did it. What are you blaming me for?
I am curious about whether he had a different accent for Japanese and Koreans. I doubt it.
You think he does the same thing all the time, and then people are forced to laugh because he's president?
Could be. I guess they had a good time. By the way, he also was having this fundraiser in the Hamptons while busy criticizing, once again, railing against the elite, in this case the Hollywood elite, who in many cases fly into the Hamptons for these fundraisers. This was the weird Soul Cycle one, too. Couldn't tell which was going to be the biggest part of this controversy.
Right.
And in the end, it turned out that it wasn't even nearly the biggest story of the weekend or day that he had put on these accents, because so many other things were happening.
Right. And if you're not familiar with Soul Cycle, you can look it up. But one of my friends tweeted that made me laugh. If you're not familiar with it, it's really an expensive S&M club.
On bikes. So,
on bikes.
I'm not familiar with it other than, it's an expensive exercise class. And, some
they make you work and you feel
it.
pain and you pay for it.
Yep. That's what they do. All right. Well,
that's what they do.
They can make a lot of money that way.
Right.
Amazing.
Well, I'll leave you with that, and
okay.
you sort yourself out. You've got the next hour to do by yourself, but it's going to be interesting because a lot has happened. This is Greg Dworkin, once again speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning after something of an absence. And I'll be back on Wednesday. We'll do it again.
Okay.
You've got the show all to yourself for the rest of the hour. We'll see what you come up with. And
yes.
Also Tuesday.
Yeah, right. I know. These days keep piling up, happening one after the other. Okay, well, thanks very much, Greg. We're glad to have you back.
Is Armando around? Somebody was giving me a hard time on Twitter and said, I'm just doing this because Armando isn't here.
Oh, I don't know. He hasn't said he is not, but what would I know? I will find out. Let's see if we can't provoke him in the next hour and cause him to call in and tell us why we're wrong. We'll find out. Okay, thanks, Greg. We'll check in with you again on Wednesday, provided everything goes smoothly. It's going to be a wacky week. I'll fill you in on that later. Thanks again. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Very brief break there, and I just realized I had to hash out the way the rest of this wacky week is going to work out. I got all kinds of different and interesting interruptions to deal with this week and possibly next, so it might be a little shaky. You know how it is at the end of August. People are on vacation. I'm not going on vacation, but instead of doing that, I'm doing a lot of other crazy and stupid and annoying things, including we're going to have some light construction work going on here, I think on Thursday, and I might be able to sort of relocate the studio such that it won't be terribly distracting, but I'm not positive. Right now, it's slated to happen like right outside the area from which we broadcast, and they're going to be power washing things and then tearing them apart and then hammering them and sawing them and all kinds of things. So it's entirely possible that we may find the Thursday show either impossible or at least inadvisable. Then I've got some other activities happening during the week, and then it's college-bound weekend for the denizens of Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, and so some question as to whether or not we will be back in place for a live show the following Monday. So that's a question mark. We'll try and see what, it may just be that there's a little bit of disruption towards the end of August, but we could have just chalked it up to vacation time and left it at that. But we're so transparent here. We're going to tell you about all the various problems we've got and how they can affect the show. All right. So you're on notice that things may get a little weird around the end of the week and then into the beginning of next week. So Donald Trump and Hong Kong and Moscow and various other locations and troublemakers around the world just settle down for a week so we don't lose track of things. All right, where to next? Let's see. There's so many things to catch up on. And we didn't even get to the fact I mentioned Moscow and the the unrest there, and Hong Kong as well. But I didn't even get to mention that the Russians have had another nuclear reactor explode. It's been a long time since the last one, but we feel like it was much more recent because of the recent airing of the mini series on HBO about Chernobyl. But just like in Red October, Andre, do you mean to tell me you've lost another nuclear reactor? Yes. And it turns out it happened in, let's say an odd way. I don't know where this idea came from, but apparently somebody in Russia thought it would be a good idea to basically, if I have this right, and who knows, I mean, what kind of facts can we trust coming out of a story like this coming out of Russia? My best understanding of it, and why would I give you my best understanding about it without reading an article when there's an article here that I could read you? But if you haven't kept up on the story, you'll be as incredulous about the background of this story as I am, I guess. Well, here's one from the New York Times. U.S. officials suspect new nuclear missile in explosion that killed 7 Russians. Now, we haven't even gotten past the headline here, but we are talking about a nuclear missile explosion. Those are usually bad. And that they killed 7 Russians. Now, mind you, this has gone from, we've had a small nuclear accident here in Russia. And there's lots of small nuclear accidents in Russia. And day one, they said, it's bad, but we've contained it. There were 2 people killed. And then 2, 3, 4 days later, it was, 5 people have been killed. And this thing could sort of happen. The death toll mounts. So now we're at 7. And I'm getting the feeling that could be, 75,000 at some point in the near future. You never know with this. Now, I'll read you the story so that we get straight what the background really is. And I don't know whether I heard it right because it was crazy to start with. And it may just be just as crazy once we're done with the article. David Sanger, Andrew Kramer, teaming up on this one. Both of them, by the way, with the middle initial E. I eliminated that in the original read. David E. Sanger, Andrew E. Kramer. And the E is for the electrons that are causing such problems in this nuclear isotope engine-powered explosion. I don't even know what to tell you. It's very weird. American intelligence officials are racing to understand a mysterious explosion. And can they even understand it? Because honestly, I hate American intelligence, which is why I have none, apparently. Donald Trump would tell you. American intelligence officials are racing to understand, as I am, a mysterious explosion, that's bad, that released radiation off the coast of northern Russia last week, apparently during the test of a new type of nuclear-propelled cruise missile, hailed by President Vladimir V. Putin as the centerpiece of Moscow's arms race with the United States, which we're not supposed to be having at all anyway. But Donald Trump has fixed the nuclear, so I guess we'll all be safe relatively quickly. Now, so my initial understanding of things is, in fact, true. This is a very odd thing. A nuclear-propelled cruise missile, because fossil fuels are so out when it comes to propelling your cruise missiles. They work pretty well. I think they're kind of got the hang of making cruise missiles work with traditional fossil fuel rocket fuel, or whatever it is that they're using. I didn't know that there was such a shortage of the stuff that they had to go with a different kind of propulsion system. But they've been successful in proving, I guess, I don't know, I've never seen them do it, I'm taking their word for it, but the Americans anyway, and I assume Russians not far off, have pretty much proven the concept they can deliver nuclear warheads anywhere. around the world. But now, of course, in an attempt to save fuel and release less carbon into the atmosphere, they're building nuclear-propelled cruise missiles, which means, and I guess at some point you might, well, all right, well, I'll begin by saying, what it means is they are using a miniature, I guess, nuclear reactor of sorts to propel the cruise missile. Like, instead of using rocket fuel, they're literally nuclear-powered nuclear missiles. And at first you might say, that seems like a very stupid idea, an extraordinarily risky thing, by the way, really in combination. Like, for instance, nuclear reactors and powerful explosives. I want to pack them together tightly into a tube and fly them through the air. Like, I would say that sounds like not a good idea. On the other hand, I guess I could see in the planning meeting at some point, like they might say, well, what has you so worried about that, for instance? And then you might say, well, high explosives, nuclear power plants, it just seems like a bad combination. And you say, sure, but in context, is it bad? What do you mean? Well, what I mean is, once the missiles are flying, if one of them or two of them, or for that matter, 10 or 15 of them have a malfunction and explode, and there's nuclear detonations over populated areas, ordinarily that would be bad to have happen. But in the context of an actual nuclear war, is it really so bad? Why not risk it? You make a strong argument, says a guy who showed up to the meeting drunk. Tell me more. And, I guess what never entered their mind was, well, how do you know they're going to work? Well, I don't. We'll have to test them. Aha. So at the test stage, aren't you really saying that these things could be flying during peacetime? And if it's just a test and we've never seen it work before, there should be a significant risk involved. To which I guess in Russia you say things like, well, why don't we mitigate the risk of an accident causing international nuclear war by testing it over our own population? You make a strong argument, says the guy who has now moved on to, I guess, smoking meth as well at the meeting. And I guess they somehow convinced themselves that this was worth doing. Think of the savings at the gas pump, they said, when we use nuclear-propelled cruise missiles. Okay, I mean, dumber things have happened, but not very many of them. American officials have said nothing publicly about the blast on Thursday, possibly one of the worst nuclear accidents in the region since Chernobyl, which was a bad one, although apparently on a far smaller scale, with at least 7 people, including scientists, confirmed dead. And how do you confirm that a scientist is dead? Well, you can't do it that quickly, not since Thursday. It has to be peer-reviewed and published, so it's already suspect. But the Russian government's slow and secretive response has set off anxiety in nearby cities and towns and attracted the attention of analysts in Washington and Europe who believe the explosion may offer a glimpse of technological weaknesses, you think, in Russia's new arms program. That's a pretty good conclusion. How did your missile test go? Well, the missile exploded. Good. Congratulations. No, the missile exploded, not the warheads. Those are supposed to explode, although in the test they're not supposed to. But the missile itself exploded. Well, that's bad. Thursday's accident happened offshore at the Nenoxa. Good luck pronouncing it correctly. Nenoxa? No idea. Missile test site, and was followed by what nearby local officials initially reported was a spike in radiation in the atmosphere. Okay, that is very vague. Late Sunday night, officials at a research institute that had employed 5 of the scientists who died confirmed for the first time that a small nuclear reactor had exploded during an experiment in the White Sea, and that authorities were investigating the cause. And the cause was big nuclear stuff that exploded. I mean, I don't know what to make of their idea of doing this. But let's continue on. Oh, my goodness. Let's see if we can take a crack at pronouncing the name of the scientific director of this institution. Vyacheslav Solovyov. Okay. The scientific director of the Russian Federal Nuclear Center said in a video interview with a local newspaper that the institute had been studying small-scale sources of energy with the use of fissile materials. Unquote. That is to say, a miniature nuclear reactor, right? I mean, am I wrong about that? Okay. I mean, they could make it in more passive voice. Electrons collided. Mistakes were made. And, all right. The United States intelligence officials apparently have said they suspect the blast involved a prototype of what NATO calls the SSC X-9 Skyfall. Is that named for the Bond film? That is a cruise missile that Mr. Putin has boasted can reach any corner of the Earth because it is partially powered by a small nuclear reactor, eliminating the usual distance limitations, of conventionally fueled missiles. That's the first offer of something that makes sense about this. And I guess the real difference here is that it is a cruise missile as opposed to a ballistic missile, as they used to say, intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. Remember that old 80s, 90s acronym? But it's not using the armed forces lingo, I remember also from the time. This would be an air breather, an air-breathing missile, one that stays entirely inside the atmosphere and doesn't rely for part of its delivery and propulsion, launching it into space and putting it in, low Earth orbit, and then deorbiting it and dropping the warheads that way with a re-entry vehicle, and that then opens up and releases warheads. But no re-entry involved here. And so there I could see, all right, so for cruise missiles, they're relatively short range missiles because it takes a lot of fuel to blast your way through the atmosphere and fly long distances. That's why they're usually cruise missiles delivered by planes or from offshore by ships. There are ground-launched cruise missiles as well, but I guess the smaller part of the arsenal there. Okay, so they wanted a cruise missile that could reach anywhere on Earth, as opposed to a ballistic missile that could do the same thing, many of which I guess they've dismantled, and a lot of which are probably relatively outdated at this point. Okay, so that's why they decided to go with a nuclear reactor on board a cruise missile. As envisioned by Mr. Putin, who played animated video of the missile at a State of the Union speech in 2018, they're copying us. The Skyfall is part of a new class of weapons designed to evade American missile defenses. Another important aspect of the cruise missile, the air-breathing threat. ICBMs and other ballistic missiles are theoretically subject to elimination by that other unproven technology that used to be called Star Wars back in the day, the SDI. Remember them? Strategic Defense Initiative, that we were going to blow up then Soviet missiles and warheads and delivery systems with lasers and sharks with lasers on their heads in outer space. Now reduced to, we're going to use mini lasers on tardigrades that are based on the moon, thanks to the failed Israeli rocket experiment. But anyway, so the idea is that all missile defenses around the world, I guess, are more vulnerable to cruise missiles because they can fly extremely low and be more difficult to detect on radar, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, of course, you get 2 for 1 in these cruise missiles. Not only are you hit by a warhead, but there's also a nuclear reactor that explodes as well. So how fun is that? All right, so that's what they're working on, and I called it the Skyfall, and this one fell out of the sky, so quite appropriate. In several recent Pentagon and other government reports, the prospect of a Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile has been frequently cited as a potential new kind of threat, even if the warhead doesn't work. They are launched into the air and able to weave an unpredictable path at relatively low altitudes. I guess that's true, too. Not only can you fly at low altitudes and try to evade radar that way. Oh, I guess it's lawn mowing day outside the window at KITM headquarters as well. That's good. So add a nice low hum. That's not my Geiger counter going off. That's just the lawnmower. All right. So at any rate, that's an interesting additional threat of a cruise missile with a, I guess, more or less unlimited propulsion energy source, is that you don't have to fly the shortest distance necessarily to where you're going. But cruise missiles, not only can they fly low and evade radar, but they can actually be programmed with topographical maps so that they can fly at, just skim the surface and then go up and down with changes in elevation, but only by minimal amounts, and thereby maintain their advantage against radar. But in addition to this, I guess if you have a nuclear propulsion source, I suppose you can fly even in a serpentine path towards your target, or fake out missile defenses about what your target might be. It looks like that's on its way to the Iowa State Fair, but in fact it's on its way to New Hampshire. It's rather predictable that it would go to New Hampshire. Oh no, look, it's changing direction. It's going to South Carolina. It's tracking our primaries. That's the problem with it. And you don't know where it's going to strike next. They could just launch them now, and they just orbit to fly around and around and around the Earth with no intention of ever detonating until the situation heats up. Who knows what they could do with an unlimited fuel source. I don't know whether it's really unlimited or not. Anyway, it's a very interesting concept, except for the fact that they explode prematurely. But other than that, I'm sure they're great. Anyway, in theory, that makes them virtually unstoppable for the existing American anti-missile systems in Alaska and California, which are designed to intercept intercontinental ballistic missile warheads in space, traveling a largely predictable path. Yeah, you just get your math out and, figure out where it went up and at what angle, and you get a pretty good thought about, certainly by the time they re-enter, you get a good idea of where they're coming down, and they're tired of relying on the predictability of gravity and trajectories. They want to mix things up a little bit. So, yet for all the hype, we found out there's a problem. Russia's early tests of the cruise missile appeared to fail. I guess there's even more failures since, even before last week. And Russia's story about what happened Thursday in the sea off of one of its major missile test sites has changed over the past 4 days as the body count has risen, and that is cause for concern all by itself. Beyond the human toll, American intelligence officials are questioning whether Mr. Putin's grand dream of a revived arsenal evaporated in that mysterious explosion, or whether it was just an embarrassing setback, just a little embarrassing setback, in Moscow's effort to build a new class of long-range and undersea weapons that the United States cannot intercept, because Russia is our friend. Russia is our friend. Russia is our friend. Everyone remembers that, right? Many outside arms experts have long regarded his effort as part fantasy, using a technology the United States tried and failed to make work in the 1950s and 60s. Oops, this is our fault. If so, it may call into question one of the Trump administration's justifications for a major new spending on American nuclear weapons to counter the Russian buildup, though the United States also cites a parallel program underway in China. So, okay. So, as part of our effort to redo our nuclear, I guess, all right, that's interesting. So Trump administration, maybe spurred by the Pentagon, is saying we need to spend a tremendous amount of money revamping our nuclear arsenal because the Russians are doing it. We need to be able to keep up with them, even though they're our friends. And even if they aren't, or aren't able to build the damn things correctly so that they explode all the time. And that's, you would think, maybe an excuse not to spend that money developing our own advanced weapons. But the problem is that China, now fresh out of delicious, beautiful chocolate cake from Pervalago, they're mad again. Plus the trade war, which is so easy to win and all that. They too are working on advanced weapons, and somebody is working on the damn things, and we're just going to have to keep going and spending money. That's, I guess, the program from the Pentagon point of view. The accident came at a critical moment in the revived United States-Russia nuclear competition. This month, the United States withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, citing long-running Russian violations, including, I guess, turning them into nuclear-powered nuclear forces and no longer intermediate, but they can fly around the world. So it's an interesting thing. It might not be completely out of the question as to whether or not it's wise or insane to withdraw from, or at least cause to be renegotiated, things like these Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. Cruise missiles were usually covered in those intermediate and short-range missile agreements, because cruise missiles were just limited by nature. They were short to intermediate range missiles, not covered by ICBM treaties. You know, remember the old SALT and START treaties, etc. They had to have their own. And remember, the INF agreement was a late development in the 80s, 90s, nuclear reductions negotiated between the United States and the then imploding Soviet Union, and then afterwards the Russian Federation. So they may need to be renegotiated anyway, because the very nature of cruise missiles is changing. And, this does throw a lot into doubt here. So, okay. This month, the United States withdrew from the INF agreement, citing long-running Russian violations, and there are doubts that New START, the one remaining major treaty limiting nuclear forces, will be renewed before it runs out in less than 2 years. The Trump administration has not had a good record of renewing international agreements. To Russian military officials, one of the appeals of the new class of hypersonic and undersea nuclear weapons is that they are not prohibited by any existing treaties, giving them free run to test and deploy them. Russia's military, in statements carried by state news agencies, first said that a fire broke out when a liquid-fueled rocket engine exploded at a testing site, but that radiation remained at normal background levels. So that was the first story. There was an explosion, but it didn't have any nuclear component. Then it was, there was a spike in radiation and 2 people died. Well, there was a bigger spike than that and 5 people died. Well, it was a nuclear reactor that exploded, even though it was small, and 7 people died. It's getting worse and worse. That contradicted a report from local authorities in the city of Severodvinsk. How about that? Maybe that's right. Severodvinsk, about 25 miles away. An official in charge of civil defense said 2 radiation meters registered a spike. Russian news media later reported radiation briefly rose to 200 times normal background levels. So it's normal background. Well, okay, it's a little elevated. 10 times? 100 times? 200. The reports were quickly taken off the city's websites, but not in time to stop a run by city residents for iodine, because they had just seen Chernobyl, a way of protecting the thyroid gland against absorbing radiation. This information should be open to inform those who might be exposed or wish to take precautions, said Alexander K. Nikitin, unless his name is Nicotine, which is possible. But Nikitin, a former Russian naval officer and researcher with the Norwegian environmental group Bellona. But in Russia, it's done differently, right? Information isn't necessarily open. It's illustrated here with a picture of Chernobyl, which sort of makes the point for us. You'll receive the Order of Lenin for this, Mr. Nikitin, except they don't give that out anymore. Or do they? I don't know. The Russian nuclear energy company Rosatom, remember them? The Ros everything, but this is the atom one, Rosatom, on Saturday said the failure occurred in an isotope power source. That's a really good euphemism there. An isotope power source for a liquid-fueled rocket engine. While the wording was confusing, it was the first official acknowledgement that the accident was nuclear in nature. And interesting that Rosatom, or did they say Rosatom or is it Rosatom? I don't know. At any rate, it's interesting that they would issue the announcement in this. Are they not? Who knows? I mean, a Russian company like that, private company that may not have any parallel in Russia. I don't know. Very confusing, but very worrying either way. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think we owe it to ourselves to continue, and maybe I should just do so a little bit more straightforwardly. Well, it's difficult not to pause to comment on Russian nuclear reactors exploding over the ocean, but I feel like this is I feel like we're going to see more about this. Maybe this should have been the story we warned you about over the weekend, although what does occur to me also that now with Jeffrey Epstein dead, at the end of the week, last week, I just felt a strange disturbance in the force, whereby all of a sudden Jeffrey Epstein's stories became less interesting to me Thursday and Friday, and I wasn't sure why, but it was obviously a prediction of his death. But actually I was thinking like maybe we should have squeezed those stories in because the weekend was going to have big developments with regard to Epstein. So I don't know whether we feel like we dropped the ball or did the right thing on ignoring small developments in the Epstein story, although I guess we could have covered the fact that there was all these documents being unsealed, but they did seem like they were less consequential because they didn't implicate anybody, so I skipped it. Well, we won't skip the Russia story because I have a feeling that it'll get bigger as time goes on. So, remember that Rosatom, or Rosatom, I'm not certain how they say that, was the one who released this statement, once again illustrating my own confusion about where the line falls between governmental and industrial policy making and official responsibility in Russia. And maybe there just is no line. And maybe that's something I have I can't tell whether it's something I don't understand or whether it's intentionally blurred, and that's the system there. And I sometimes lay that at the feet of there being a oligarchic mobocracy there. But maybe I just misunderstand the provenance of this. Anyway, they were using this weird euphemism of an isotope power source for a liquid-fueled rocket engine, which you would think, I thought a liquid-fueled rocket engine didn't need a power source of any other kind. The liquid was the fuel. That's why it's called fuel. But okay. While the wording was confusing, it was the first official acknowledgement that the accident was nuclear in nature. The change in Russia's account, along with separate American intelligence reporting and satellite imagery, got the attention of American intelligence officials. They are now exploring whether the small nuclear reactor that Mr. Putin talked about when promoting the weapon failed or exploded. While the scale of the accident appeared vastly smaller than the explosion of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor in 1986, which killed thousands, the slow release of muddied information, the public confusion and distrust of official accounts, and the race for some limited form of protection seemed to have echoes to the reaction to that disaster. It has never been clear just how far along Mr. Putin's grand plans for the cruise missile, Now, I guess we now find out the name that the Russians have for it, called the 9M730 Burevestnik by the Russians. We're not sure how far along those grand plans had gotten. A missile defense review published by the Pentagon, after careful scrubbing to avoid signaling to Moscow what American intelligence officials think they know, notes that Russian leaders also claim that Russia possesses a new class of missile that travels 5 times faster than the speed of sound and moves just above the atmosphere in an evasive pattern that would defeat American anti-missile technology. But the report made no assessment of whether they would work. So that is interesting, too. I guess when they noted they were hypersonic, that is a different sort of thing than the traditional cruise missile that I was thinking of. So I guess the nuclear propulsion system, I guess, would still be necessary for it to be able to fly around for a much larger range and to deviate in its course without worrying about having enough fuel to make it to its target. But to be able to fly at 5 times the speed of sound inside the atmosphere, I think might be pretty difficult or maybe even impossible. So I guess this is why it moves just above the atmosphere. So a lot less resistance and a lot more ability to travel at that hypersonic speed. Okay, so it's a high altitude cruise missile that isn't an actual air breather, but is, and so therefore, I guess it's not radar nuclear defenses that they're talking about evading, but actual interceptors, and I guess the use of radar to predict where the weapon is headed is rendered moot. I've generally been of the belief that this attempt at developing an unlimited range nuclear-powered cruise missile is folly, said Ankit Panda, which is spelled like panda, but I'm assuming is pronounced differently, because otherwise that's just silly. A nuclear expert at the Federation of American Scientists is quoted as saying. He's Mr. Panda, I think. I wonder if people actually say it that way. Anyway, it's unclear if someone in the Russian defense industrial bureaucracy may have managed to convince a less technically informed leadership that this is a good idea, but the United States tried this, quickly discovered the limitations and risks, and abandoned it with good reason. Ivan Konovalov, director of the Center for Strategic Trends in Moscow, who's probably Ivan, not Ivan, but and a military analyst, characterized the experiments underway now as pioneering work in a new technology and fraught with danger. When there are tests, anything can happen, he said in a telephone interview. But for Mr. Putin, facing protests that reveal some public restiveness with his long rule, the weapons programs have been part of his argument that he is restoring Russia to the position the Soviet Union held as a great power. When Mr. Putin first spoke about the new weapons in 2018, most of the attention fell on his description of an undersea drone called the Poseidon that could operate autonomously and, American officials feared, hit the West Coast in a nuclear second strike after an initial exchange. Mr. Putin seemed to be seeking attention for the new arsenal, probably because he could use it as a bargaining chip and avoid even having to build very many of them, I guess, and thereby get maximum leverage out of it without actually bankrupting the Russian Federation the way the arms race bankrupted the Soviet Union. Nobody wanted to talk to us, Mr. Putin complained in the speech. Now, listen to us. Okay, so really pursuing a new class of nuclear weapons for much the same reason that the North Koreans pursue nuclear weapons. Not a surprise, I guess. He and others have talked about Russia's plans for the Poseidon in a nod to the doomsday machine parodied in the 1964 classic Dr. Strangelove, which could hit the West Coast even if Moscow and Russia's military centers were already destroyed in a nuclear strike. While fictional, the movie was based on a real Soviet plan, a demonstration of how long Soviet and Russian leaders have entertained the idea. The Poseidon undersea drone still appears to be years away, but for Mr. Putin, the most promising weapon has been the nuclear-propelled cruise missile, which he advertised to be able to fly an unlimited range, an answer to American global strike weapons that are designed to reach any corner of the Earth with a non-nuclear warhead. It's just nuclear propulsion, I guess, is on top. I guess, I don't know. I mean, they could certainly deliver nuclear materials that way, too. And I guess everything's nuclear material if you are a nuclear-propelled cruise missile. Very interesting. It's an interesting idea. But, probably ruled out by the United States a long time ago on the basis of, well, you'd never be able to test the thing except by flying a miniature nuclear reactor over, who knows where. And I guess suppose you could try and limit it to areas out in the ocean. And I guess this, too, was flying over the White Sea as opposed to flying over Moscow center or something. But I guess if you really need to test the concept of can it fly around the world and just keep on going and going, eventually you're going to fly over some areas that are dangerous. The United States, I guess, was unwilling to take the risk of possibly killing thousands of people in a nuclear accident. But Russia doesn't give a damn one way or the other, so I guess it's left to them to develop this concept. A little more than a year ago, Russia's Ministry of Defense produced a carefully edited YouTube video that showed the missile heading aloft and left the impression, wrongly, that it was already working. So, a deep fake that screwed us up over YouTube. What do you know? The Russian admission that the accident centered on an isotope power source followed a series of anonymous statements run on TASS and other Russian news sites that seemed to mix fact, rumor, and some disinformation. But satellite images offered some clues. What do you know? Some fake news would come into the mix. An August 8th image released by Planet Labs, a firm that launches small satellites, appears to show the Serebrenka, a ship that carries nuclear fuel and waste, offshore from the Nenoxa missile test site. Its presence, Jeffrey Lewis, a scholar at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute, it's getting confused. It's like having LLCs inside of a college. Where is this? Who's running this? I don't know. I mean, I don't have any reason to suspect that the person is off base or an operative for Russia or whatever, but I don't know what we're talking about here. The James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. Sounds good, right? Middlebury Institute. Middlebury College? Middlebury Institute? Middlebury where? I don't know. I'm curious. We'll look it up. I'm sure the authors vetted it to some extent. Anyway, that vessel, the Serebrenka, I'm hoping I'm even close, which can safely collect nuclear waste, was also seen at another test of the 9M730 Burevestnik, the weird missile that they're developing. Other facilities examined by Mr. Lewis's experts seemed to show testing facilities consistent with those previously shown in Russian reports on past tests. Okay, essentially, they sent a nuclear waste cleanup ship to the test site, which I guess indicates that there was some belief on the Russian part that there was a possibility of, well, if not a possibility of nuclear accident, then at least nuclear materials in play. On Sunday, Mr. Lewis said that given the string of other suspected failures in tests of the missile's propulsion system, we think they are having troubles getting the reactor to light and create the heat to fuel the missile. The images on the Russian YouTube video doesn't show you enough to prove it's working, he said. Maybe Putin will make it happen, he added. Maybe it will never work. So I guess maybe the thing launches initially on liquid traditional rocket fuel, and I guess at some point when the thing is at altitude or along the way, or maybe playing off of the energy being produced from the liquid fuel, is supposed to start up the nuclear reactor to keep the propulsion system going once it's aloft. That's my best guess at what they're saying here. Nuclear arms races are partly about the weapons, but they are also about leaving the impression that systems work, even if they don't. Both sides engaged in propaganda. Oh boy, both sides in a nuclear accident, huh? Both sides engaged in propaganda and lies about the capability and size of their arsenals during the Cold War. They also covered up accidents. This is true. The United States lost a nuclear weapon at sea off the coast of Japan and didn't acknowledge it for years, one of many cover-ups. And this would hardly be the first time the Russian military and its Soviet predecessors covered up a testing disaster. A 1960 explosion at the Baikonur Cosmodrome was not acknowledged for nearly 3 decades. The official death toll then was 78. Now there are some estimates that ranged into the hundreds. With the passage of nearly 60 years, the truth may never be known. And that calls for dramatic music. All right, well, very interesting. By the way, a correction in the article is noted here. An earlier version of the article misstated the location of Chernobyl. Well, all right. You'd think you could get that one right. But it is worth pointing out it is in present-day Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union at the time of the accident, but it is not in Russia. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. Okay. Seemed like an important story. Probably will become more important as time goes on. Just wanted to keep you up to date on things happening there. Gosh, there's a lot more that we could be exploring here. But it's getting close to the end of the show. Where will we go? I don't know. We're going to have to do it more or less chronologically and just play catch up for the rest of the week, I think. All right. Item from today's Axios reports, just found here, just to switch directions entirely. Another weird, stupid thing that Donald Trump might be involved in. A scoop, we're told in the headline here. Jonathan Swan has this scoop inside Trump's strange pen pal diplomacy with Justin Trudeau. It doesn't sound like diplomacy at all, but and the pen is a Sharpie, because that's all Donald Trump can write with those little fingers. It's like the fat pencils that they gave you in first grade when you were learning to write. That's how it works with him. President Trump has sent highly unusual Sharpie-written notes to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at least twice, Axios has learned. One missive was so odd, this is why we're talking about it, that the Canadian ambassador double-checked with the White House to be sure it wasn't a prank. What? In at least one instance, Trudeau also wrote to Trump. The exchange of handwritten notes, never before reported, was confirmed by several sources with first-hand knowledge. And I guess if you can believe that he's trading beautiful, beautiful letters with Kim Jong-un, I guess it should be easy to believe that it's happening with Justin Trudeau as well. But the letters may not be beautiful. The diplomatic missives include a torn-out Bloomberg Newsweek cover featuring a portrait of Justin Trudeau. Justin, best wishes. Looking good. Donald. And also a back and forth about U.S.-Canada trade figures that culminated in Trudeau sending Trump a printout of the website of the Office of the United States Trade Representative with a smiley face beside the U.S. government figure showing America has a trade surplus with Canada, contrary to Trump's claims. That's about how I figured such an exchange would end, but only in my imagination. But it happens to be true. The context: the May 1st through 7th, 2017 issue of Bloomberg Business Week. That would have been the cover we're talking about here, featuring a picture of Trudeau headlined, "The Anti-Trump," caught President Trump's attention. It had his name on it. According to 4 sources with direct knowledge, Trump tore the cover off the magazine and wrote on it in silver Sharpie, not gold, something to the effect of, "Looking good. See, I told you. Hope it's not true that you're the anti-Trump," according to these sources. Wow. Before the White House mailed this diplomatic correspondence, it is not diplomatic. I mean, it's diplomatic in the sense that it's government to government, but it's not very diplomatic in the sense that diplomacy was employed in the crafting of it. So, before the White House mailed this diplomatic correspondence, it went through the normal clearance process inside the National Security Council. They must have been surprised by seeing something so dumb and frivolous. While some White House staff thought it was not the appropriate way to communicate with a foreign leader, they ultimately figured it was done in good fun and would be interpreted as positive outreach. Normalizing, in other words, said a source with direct knowledge of what happened. So the White House mailed the magazine cover to the Canadian Embassy in Washington. The Canadian ambassador thought it was a prank, according to two sources familiar with the situation. He called the White House to check, and a White House official confirmed to the ambassador that the note was real, one of those sources said, and then they slapped their foreheads. Months later, on December 8th, 2017, President Trump falsely told a rally crowd in Pensacola, Florida, that the U.S. has a trade deficit with Canada. Around the same time, Trump also mailed Trudeau a document purporting to show that the U.S. had a trade deficit with Canada, according to a source with direct knowledge. Trump wrote in Sharpie on the document, "Not good," with 2 exclamation points, or something to that effect, the source recalled. Trump's document only mentioned America's deficit in the trade of goods and ignored its surplus in services. The two combined would give the U.S. its overall surplus. A few weeks later, Trump received a handwritten letter from Trudeau. The note on Trudeau's official stationery, marked by the maple leaf, began with a friendly tone but ended with a drop of acid. "Dear Donald," Trudeau wrote in the letter, dated December 20th, 2017, according to a source with direct knowledge of its contents, which 2 other sources confirmed. "It's been a busy year. Enjoy the Christmas holidays. You deserve it. One thing," Trudeau added, "you gave a great speech in Pensacola, but you were slightly off on the balance of trade with Canada. USTR, U.S. Trade Representative, says so. All the best for 2018, Justin." The second page of the letter brought the kicker. Trudeau enclosed a printout of Canada's informational page from the website of the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Trudeau underlined the section on the USTR website, which at the time reported that the U.S. goods and services trade surplus with Canada was $12.5 billion in 2016. Trudeau circled the $12.5 billion and drew a cheeky little smiley face next to it, according to a source with direct knowledge. A Canadian government official responded to this reporting. "We are not going to comment on whether or what paper was exchanged between our two countries. There was a lot of back and forth. That said, it is certainly true that there were disagreements between our two countries about the figures, and we repeatedly pointed to USTR and U.S. Commerce's own figures. On your second point, the Bloomberg cover, no comment, but we won't deny it. Sorry." It actually says that in there. It doesn't. Why this matters. This is a very weird thing. Axios just writes everything in such strange format. They love doing this. That could have been a perfectly normal format, just paragraph after paragraph. It reads fine. It's just broken up into stupid Axios mini paragraphs and bullet points. And I ignored all of that formatting for you. Why does it matter? Because Canada is big and they're next door to us and we're supposed to be friendly. I mean, do I need to read you this section? Behind the scenes, Trump privately refers to Trudeau as a wise guy, per sources with direct knowledge. He describes Trudeau as young and cocky, and he resents it when Trudeau comments on American politics. So maybe the White House vetters were misunderstanding the nature of the communication between the two of them and should not have approved this stupid method of communication. Trump has gleefully recounted to aides how he threatened the Canadians with auto tariffs. He says it got him a better deal on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which doesn't exist. Trump has also privately described Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, as very nasty, because she's female, and that's what he does. According to senior administration officials, it's always nasty with the women. Trump was pleased with the optics of the G7 last year, which is incredible. Trump says he dominated Trudeau there, the advisor says, and he loves the viral photo of himself sitting with his arms crossed. He loves that, with world leaders hovering over him. Trump also relished leaving the summit early, a snub to Trudeau, who Trump said had treated him with disrespect. Oh my God. The White House did not respond to requests for comment. The big picture, The president is in year 3 of his relationships with foreign leaders, and in some cases they've changed substantially. Trump's bromance with France's 41-year-old leader Emmanuel Macron has faded, and Trump privately places Macron in a similar wise guy category. That means he fooled you, you dumbass. As the 47-year-old Trudeau. Last week, Trump chided Macron on Twitter for purporting, he knows that word, to represent the U.S. in conversations with Iran. I doubt that happened. Trump has also hammered China with escalating tariffs and increasingly tough rhetoric, a significant change from his more frequent emphasis on his close personal relationship with President Xi Jinping in year 1. Beautiful chocolate cake. We all remember that one. Okay, so that a new development as well. And just a few minutes remain. Let me throw this out. I don't know whether this is a quick read or not, but let me throw out this working theory here. There's been a lot of questions also over the weekend regarding the immigration raids in Mississippi, where they targeted the chicken plants, as you know, and they rounded up all these undocumented workers, leaving kids with no one to go home to, and other public relations disaster from the standpoint of the United States should do things responsibly. But since cruelty is the point, a big win for in the minds of the Trump administration for the Trump administration, but a disaster for everyone else. Raised a lot of questions. I did happen to see that, I guess, Jake Tapper asked American officials on his show over the weekend, hey, we see article after article of undocumented workers employed at Trump properties. Why does no one ever think to enforce the law there? And huge dodge by officials there, just saying, oh, well, you don't know that we're not investigating them, but we're not. But you don't know. That's the point. And so I guess they froze Jake Tapper in place on that one. But another angle circulating on the ICE raids in Mississippi. Here, Adrian Carrasquillo, our author for The New Republic, ICE's raids were a win for corporate exploitation. Destroying families won't end migration, but it will make abused workers less likely to speak up. Basically, I guess, long story short, in case we don't get to it, and it doesn't look like time will allow us, there was something behind the choice of targets here. It wasn't random or anything like that. The sweeping immigration raid of 7 poultry plants that swept up 680 undocumented workers, leaving children sobbing and wives, and I imagine some husbands as well, tearfully saying goodbye to husbands through chain link fences as authorities processed workers, the way they had been processing chickens, I guess. For many children, it was their first day of school, one that some ended sleeping in a gym after their parents were detained. On Sunday, Trump administration officials conceded that the timing was unfortunate, coming on the heels of a white supremacist hate crime that targeted Mexicans in El Paso. Even more troublingly, though, the plants raided, including those owned by Koch, yes, Koch Foods, as in Koch brothers, which in August of 2018 paid $3.75 million to settle a lawsuit alleging racial and sexual harassment against Latino workers at these plants. The suit alleged that the supervisors touched and or made sexually suggestive comments to Hispanic female employees, hit Hispanic employees, and charged many of them money for normal everyday work activities. As part of the settlement, Koch Foods, no relation, it says, my goodness, that's an easy mistake to make, to the Republican mega donors, agreed to create a 24-hour bilingual hotline for worker complaints. All right, whether or not it's related to the Koch brothers, I guess, and I guess it isn't, it nonetheless is a major issue, of course, because we're talking about a major corporate employer, basically one that got in trouble with the government for mistreating its Hispanic workers. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, you would think that they would not want to be the target of an immigration raid, but when it has the salutary effect of rounding up all the troublemakers who cost you all that money and kept reporting you to the government and got you in hot water with the government, even this government, I guess in all, it's a net positive. You get to round up, arrest, destroy the families of, and deport all the people who caused you this pain. And now they're right back in the saddle, holding job fairs, looking for more workers to replace those arrested. And I would bet you they're not even checking their immigration status either, because there's no penalty for having employed it. Imagine getting caught with 680 undocumented workers, although it's not entirely clear that they are all, in fact, undocumented. That's just how many got arrested. But imagine getting arrested with that many suspected of working without papers, and there's no consequence. What a weird situation. Well, it's happening for the president, too, even though they're not rounding up his workers. Anyway, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam to bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. Greg has provided me with lots more ammunition for tomorrow's show. Let's see what's up for today with Justice. City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism professor Jeff Jarvis, back in the news, blasting the media for acting as stenographers for Trump.
From
What an
Daily
interesting
Codes
thought.
Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this one? The Department of Justice has moved to decertify the outspoken union of immigration judges. The Trump administration moved to limit state powers to block pipelines and fossil fuel terminals, and a battle to give African Americans political power is playing out in Mississippi's court. It's all happening in Mississippi. Next.